Happy Halloween, Star Wars fans. I have a special review out for you today. We're going to be reviewing 2 books and 1 short story that is included in the paperback edition of Outbound Flight. So if you have this copy of Outbound Flight, you'll have this short story included. The story is called Missed Encounter, and it's one that I wanted to bring attention to today because it kind of fits in with Halloween, because it is a kind of suspense, little bit of a horror element included with it. A lot of mystery going on within the story. And I don't want to say too much about it because the more I say, the more it kind of gives it away. And I don't even want to say who wrote it because even that would kind of give it away. But it's a nice, simple, kind of, suspenseful Star Wars short story. I think it's a really good one and one that's worth checking out. And again, if you're looking for something that's more in tune with the holiday of Halloween, I think this short story will be for you. I really enjoyed it, thought it was a good read, and like I said, I don't want to say too much about it because I feel like I'll be getting into spoilery territory. But again, it's included with Outbound Flight, so if you want to read it, the story's called Missed Encounter, and it's included with the paperback copy of Outbound Flight. And Outbound Flight is actually one that I'll be reviewing next month, so be on the lookout for that. I'll be reviewing that along with several other books, so as I wrap up my Star Wars book reviews. But, so Missed Encounter, again, if you're looking for something that kind of fits in with the spirit of Halloween, I think that's a good one to check out. And, and I think fans of the expanded universe will be happy with it for a few reasons. Again, I don't want to say too much, but it's a good short story, nice little suspense type of deal where the Imperials are stuck in the ass end of nowhere, and there's a mysterious intruder that's making trouble for them. And that's all I'll say. That's it. And I think it plays quite well. And to kind of compare it to something, it kind of reminds me of that. For those of you who watched the 2D Clone Wars cartoon, there's the bit where Asajj Ventress is, attacking and picking off the clone troopers one by one. It's not quite as creepy as that, but it does kind of fit alongside that. And I think if you're in the mood for something close to that, I think you'll enjoy this. So that's my recommendation, short story. I think it's a good one. Check it out. As far as the 2 books I have lined up for you, one that might fit in with Halloween, especially if you're into villains and, the Sith and things like that. It's the prequel story of Darth Plagueis. I have here, what I have here is the audiobook, which I downloaded through Audible, which is a great app. I love Audible. And this book is written by James Luceno. The audiobook was read by Daniel Davis. And James Luceno is a familiar name to us, especially on this channel where I've reviewed plenty of his work. He wrote the Agents of Chaos books for the New Jedi Order series. He wrote the Tarkin book as part of the new Disney canon. And he also wrote, his biggest contribution, I think, are the 2/3 of the Dark Lord trilogy. He wrote Labyrinth of Evil, and he also wrote The Rise of Darth Vader. And the 3rd part of that Dark Lord trilogy is the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Really good trilogy, highly recommend it. Go back and check out my review. But here he tackles a whole different animal where he basically tries to provide a backstory for the mysterious Darth Plagueis, who is the famously brought into the Star Wars mythos during that amazing opera house scene in Revenge of the Sith, which pretty much everybody agrees. I don't think anybody is going to disagree with me if I say that's the best scene in the entirety of the prequel trilogy. Really well done, well acted. Ian McDiarmid delivered it perfectly. And I'll be honest, I never needed a backstory on Darth Plagueis. I think everything that we get in that scene in the movie is perfectly acceptable. And I even like a little bit of the ambiguity there, where we all kind of drew from it that Darth Plagueis was the Sith Master to Palpatine, who was the apprentice. We all kind of drew that from the story, but he never directly says that in the movie. And I love stuff like that, where they leave you the breadcrumbs and everybody just kind of jumps to the conclusion and figures it out for themselves. We can all tell that it's like, okay, he was the apprentice in the story, and you can tell just by his facial reactions and the way he tells the story, but he never directly says it. And there are times where he might even be lying to Anakin. So it's like, you don't even know. It's like, this story could have been completely fabricated and made up. Who knows? And Palpatine is just the master manipulator. But this book pretty much sets it in stone. Yes, Darth Plagueis existed. Yes, Darth Plagueis was the master to Emperor Palpatine. And yes, he has his own story within the greater expanded universe canon. So whether or not you enjoy this book will rely on whether or not you actually want to find out more about Darth Plagueis. Me personally, I kind of liked keeping him more mysterious and not knowing anything. So this was a book that I guess I probably shouldn't have read or not listened to the audiobook, because it's like it kind of spoils the whole mysterious and ambiguous aspect that I liked about that scene in Revenge of the Sith. But I listened to it and I experienced it, and I will say this: I think it's a very interesting book among the Star Wars expanded universe. The big thing that sticks out to me is that the way it's written, it has kind of this detached, almost historical perspective to it. I don't want to say it feels like a nonfiction biography about a historical figure. Part of me wishes that the author had leaned into that even more, and it just straight up felt like I was reading something about Henry VIII or something to that degree. Just a complete detached, look at the historical events, and here are the facts, here's what happened, here was the man, and you draw whatever conclusions from it you want. And it goes into that a little bit, but not quite. And part of me wishes, like, man, I wish it had just been completely written like a nonfiction biography. But in any case, it does have more of a detached feel to it, where the narrator just feels like a complete, just stating what happened, rather than using that perspective to kind of craft like an opinion or anything about the story. So it's one of the more interesting reads from that perspective, because not a lot of Star Wars books are written that way. And it gives you a basic complete history of Darth Plagueis, starting from when he betrayed his master all the way to when Palpatine kills him, which I'm not spoiling anything by saying that. So you get all the accounts in between, and everything that happened to him. Fighting a backstory on Darth Plagueis, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was fine for what it was. Again, it's not something I ever really needed, but again, that's part of the whole point of the expanded universe, was to expand on what you see in the movie. So you don't need it to understand the movies, but if you want additional detail on one of the more interesting aspects of the mythos of the prequel trilogy, it's probably worth checking out. Now, where I'm going to criticize it at least a little bit is that I think it goes a little too far into trying to tie it into the events of the movies. If anything, like the second half of the book almost feels like it's more about Palpatine than it is about Darth Plagueis. And because it's about Palpatine's rise, how he becomes the pupil, and then he ultimately betrays the master and everything that happens in between. But they worked in a lot of elements into this story. Like Darth Maul comes up, Count Dooku comes up. They even referenced the Bando Gora at one point. Now, the Bando Gora were a villainous cult led by Komari Vosa that were the main antagonists of the Bounty Hunter video game, which I played on GameCube. That was a good game. Really good stuff. So if you're looking for a recommendation for a Star Wars video game, check out Bounty Hunter. I thought it was solid. But I think it worked a little too hard to try and tie it into the events of the movies. And actually, as we find out, one thing that surprised me is that Darth Plagueis died right before the events of Episode 1. Like, not long before the events of Episode 1. And I'm like, oh, I thought, like, the impression I got from the story that Palpatine was telling is that he died, like, years ago. Like, decades ago. And Palpatine put his plans into motion many, many moons ago, but it felt like it's like, all right, I've got Darth Plagueis out of the way. Now it's time for me to, take over the galaxy, basically. And again, like I said, they bring in Darth Maul and Count Dooku and various other things. And I felt like it worked a little too hard to tie it into the events of the movies, where I think I would have preferred something more like Knights of the Old Republic, where it's so far detached from the movies. And because of Darth Plagueis and Palpatine and everything, it couldn't be completely detached from the films, but it's the way it stands now. I would have liked it if it had been detached enough to where it would completely be able to stand on its own. But as is, it just kind of feels like, all right, we need to fill in this backstory, we need to fill in that backstory, we need to explain where Darth Maul comes from, we need to explain how Dooku fell to the dark side, we need to explain where the Bando Gora comes from, which, no, you didn't, because I don't, not as many people play the video games. I don't think you need to explain the Bando Gora, but I think it's an enjoyable enough read, but again, I wish Lucino had gone even further with the whole biographical aspect of it, and I wish that it didn't tie so closely to the movies. They didn't feel the need to explain where a bunch of things came from. I thought that was unnecessary. Like I said, the whole second half of the book feels like it's more about Palpatine than it is about Darth Plagueis. But as it is, if you're interested in finding out about additional things from the movies, like Darth Plagueis, like Darth Maul, and all those other things, you'll probably enjoy this. If you're looking to purely fill in backstory, I think it's an enjoyable enough read. I think Darth Plagueis himself is kind of an interesting character, kind of an interesting one to follow. Again, he's so shrouded in mystery from the story that Palpatine tells in the in Revenge of the Sith that finding out anything about him, I guess, would be interesting. And for what it is, I think it's a solid read. And no, he's not Supreme Leader Snoke. No, so don't read the book expecting to find out that he's Supreme Leader Snoke. This book was released long before the Disney canon was conceived, so don't even worry about that. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Darth Plagueis. I think it's an interesting read. I thought the audiobook was quite good. I like the way that it was read. Very enjoyable audiobook. So yeah, solid stuff. Again, I don't think it's a must read among Star Wars canon, but I think, again, if you're looking for backstory, I think it's a solid one to read. So that brings me up to the final book I will be reviewing as part of this video. This one is an ambitious one. It's written by Michael A. Stackpole, who you may remember was basically the spearhead of the X-Wing books, namely the books centered on the Rogue Squadron. And what I have here and what I'm reviewing right here is his most ambitious book that he's ever written for Star Wars, I, Jedi. And this is one that came recommended to me. People said, dude, you got to read I, Jedi. This is one you have to do. And I got that recommendation like months ago from a friend of mine. He's like, dude, you got to read I, Jedi. I think you'll really like it. And I read it, and I was like, holy shit, that was a unique experience among Star Wars books. And like I said, I'm not going to say it's Stackpole's best work, even though he, according to Wikipedia, he said that Stackpole says that I, Jedi is his favorite book that he wrote. And I can understand it because it feels like he poured his heart and soul into this one. And it's really a super ambitious Star Wars project that is not only interestingly written, it also tries to encompass so many different aspects of the expanded universe. And in doing so, it creates kind of an epic tale. And the thing that I really like about it, that really stands out to me and really helps it to stand out among other Star Wars books, is that it's written in the first person. The entire story is told from Corran Horn's point of view. The book is about Corran Horn and basically his Jedi training and ultimately his acceptance of his standing in the galaxy as a Jedi and what that means and what kind of impact the Jedi training has on him. Now, how Stackpole goes about writing that story is very interesting. It begins with his wife Mirax, who is his love interest in the Rogue Squadron books, getting captured, and she is kept prisoner by a group of pirates known as the Invids, who have a star destroyer called the Invidious, I believe it was called, that they use as their home base, and she is trapped there, and Corran Horn convinces himself that the only way he'll be able to save her is if he taps into his latent force powers, which he finds out, which again, go back to my reviews of the X-Wing books, he finds out that he's a force sensitive. So now this is about him refining his skills and deepening his connection to the Force, basically, and getting trained by Luke Skywalker. And now, where the story gets really, really interesting is that, Corran is kind of a man of, he's quite the journeyman, if you think about it, among Star Wars characters. He was, worked in Corellian security. He's a member of Rogue Squadron. He's a Force sensitive, and here he learns how to be a Jedi. So it's like he's got like all the bases covered. He's like Han Solo, like an authoritarian security type guy and a Jedi all rolled into one. It's kind of this very interesting persona that they've crafted here for the protagonist. But one thing that they do here that is really, really interesting, and I can't think of any other expanded universe books that did this, and if there are any, please let me know, because I'll be fascinated to see. But go back and watch my previous reviews of the Jedi Academy trilogy. It was a series I was not a huge fan of, to be perfectly honest. I thought it was a mess. But this book takes the very interesting approach of basically retconning an aspect of the Jedi Academy trilogy by saying that Corran Horn was there the entire time and was one of Luke Skywalker's first students in the Jedi Academy trilogy while the events of the Jedi Academy trilogy took place. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Because it's so funny. I was reading it and it kind of dawned on me. I was like, this all sounds really familiar. And then I'm like, yeah, this is from the Jedi Academy trilogy. So basically, through the suggestion of Luke Skywalker and Wedge Antilles, Corran Horn takes on a different identity, to join the Jedi Academy trilogy. Turns out he takes on the name of his grandfather. Also takes his grandfather's lightsaber because his grandfather was a Jedi. And that name that he used was the name of one of Luke's students in the Jedi Academy trilogy. So they basically retconned a character out of existence and just said it was Corran Horn the entire time. I'm like, wow, that's interesting. And although, to be perfectly honest, I would have liked more Dorsk 81. I like Dorsk 81. Here's the thing. I'm the biggest Dorsk 81 fan on the planet, mainly because I love the concept for the character. And I felt like that was a character that was criminally underexplored in the expanded universe. And if I were talented enough to write a Star Wars book, I would probably bring Dorsk 81 back and make a story about him, because I just think he's fascinating. But in any case, we see the events of the Jedi Academy trilogy play out from Corran Horn's point of view. Specifically, the events with Kip Duran getting influenced by the disembodied spirit of Exar Kun, the original fallen Jedi and Sith Master, and all of those events. And Corran Horn basically reacts the way any sane person would. It's like, yeah, all right, we stopped Exar Kun. Kip is back under control, even though he killed 25 million sentient beings. And Luke's like, yeah, we're going to welcome him back into the academy. And Corran's like, say what? Like, no, we can't let that guy back. He murdered, like, literally millions of people. We can't do that. Which I said the same thing while I was reading the book, the Jedi Academy trilogy. I'm like, don't let that motherfucker back in the Jedi Academy. Are you insane? I was like, well, he was acting under the influence of Exar Kun. It's like, yeah, but he also murdered millions of people. And it's like, if he can be influenced to do that, I don't think giving him Jedi training is a great idea. And he should probably be locked up somewhere. But whatever. But anyway, I like that somebody in the universe had that reaction where it's like, no, don't let him back. And that's where Corran ultimately decides to leave the Jedi Academy, and it's like, all right, I'm going to forget the Jedi, I'm going to rely on my own training, my experience in Corellian security, and I'm going to go save my wife myself. And that leads into more of like the spy aspect of the novel, where it's like, he infiltrates the Invids and tries to get information, and runs into these rogue Force users. They're kind of like a Sith Jedi hybrid called the Jensari, I believe. And that becomes an interesting obstacle for him. And then Corran has to rely on his Jedi training. Luke comes back and helps him out. And fun is had by all. Again, this is a very interesting read where it like combines so many different elements as far as like playing with the expanded universe canon, focusing on Jedi training, but then also having these kind of spy movie type of elements with him having to infiltrate the pirate gang and save his wife and everything, and dealing with like these weird non-Jedi Jedis. And I think it's very, like I said, the word I keep going back to is ambitious. I think it was a very ambitious project. Now, am I going to sit here and say that it's my favorite Star Wars book ever? No, I wouldn't go there. But I think if you're looking for something different, and something that kind of goes against the norm. I think that this is right up your alley, and I do think it's a really, really good book. I probably wouldn't have it on a top 10, probably top 20 though. I think it really stands out among the other Star Wars books, and after all the Star Wars books that I've read, when you start feeling like you're kind of reading the same things over again, this one provides something a little bit different. Again, we get to see everything through Corran Horn's point of view. Not a lot of Star Wars, but I honestly, off the top of my head, I can't think of any other Star Wars books that are written from the first-person perspective. So that helps it stand out right there. Fudging the expanded universe canon a little bit, which was really fun when it dawned on me that that's what was happening. I was like, oh, okay. Was like, well, at least there's like some kind of a reward for reading the Jedi Academy trilogy, and in a way, it kind of makes it a little better. By it's like nice to know that there was this much better story going on in the background while that trilogy was going on. So there's that, and I think it's a really interesting read all the way through, and you get to see Corran decide to join the Jedi, then he leaves the Jedi, and then realizes, oh shit, I do need the Force powers after all, and he gets his own special lightsaber and everything else, and he comes to terms with basically who he is and what powers he possesses and what it means to be a Jedi. So you get to see his character, almost like Luke in the original trilogy, you get to see his character grow to accept his place in the galaxy as a Jedi, and what that means and all the stumbles and falls that he faces along the way. And to that end, I think it was a success. I think it's a very enjoyable read, and I recommend it strongly. I think Jedi was again, it's one of the more unique entries in the expanded universe canon. I was really happy to read it after it was suggested to me. I was like, you know what? That was a good one. I was really happy that one was recommended to me. So I'm going to recommend it to you all as well. If you have not read Jedi by Michael Stackpole, I recommend it. I think it's a solid read for sure. And it's the best thing I've reviewed in this video. So we'll say that. So if you take nothing else away from this video, be sure to check out Jedi. I think it's a good one. So that concludes this month's review. Thank you once again, everybody, for watching. Happy Halloween once again. Hopefully you all enjoy the holiday and enjoy trick-or-treating and all that other fun stuff. And that is all I have for you. So once again, thanks for listening. I've got 2 more Star Wars reviews before the end of the year, and I close out the series. Next month is going to be a continuation of the works of Timothy Zahn. And then in December, I'm going to close out with an appropriate closer. That's all I'll say. It's an appropriate one to close on. But that is all I have to say now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you all later.